They went to war with no weapons. They carried maps, flashlights, and cameras. They wore uniforms they had no idea how to press. They were curators, architects, art historians, and museum directors. Men in their 40s and 50s who had spent their careers in libraries and galleries, now crawling through salt mines and bombed-out castles in active combat zones, trying to save the things that armies were too busy to protect. They were the Monument's men. And the war they fought was one that no history book had prepared anyone for. When the Allies began to push across Europe in 1943, it became clear that something unprecedented was happening to the continent's cultural heritage. Hitler had not merely invaded countries, he had systematically stripped them. The ERR, the Nazi looting organization, was operating with the efficiency of an industrial enterprise, cataloging and removing art, books, religious objects, and historical artifacts from every occupied territory. An estimated 5 million objects were stolen. Some were destined for Hitler's planned Führermuseum in Linz, a monument to himself built from the cultural property of every people he had conquered. Others were distributed to senior Nazi officials. Others were hidden in salt mines, in castles, in bunkers, buried under European countryside. The Allies understood, by 1943, that winning the war was not enough. If the art was destroyed, either by the bombs of their own advance or by Nazi orders to burn rather than surrender, then the victory would be incomplete in a way that could not be measured in territory or casualty counts. Something would be lost that could not be replaced. The Greeks had built the Parthenon once. Michelangelo had painted the Sistine Chapel once. Da Vinci had painted the Last Supper once. These things existed in the world as singularities, not as cultural decoration, but as the accumulated evidence of what human beings were capable of when they were at their best. Destroying them would be a different kind of atrocity, quieter and slower acting, whose full damage would only be felt by generations who never knew what they had lost. So the Allied command created the Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives section, the MFAA, a unit unlike anything that had existed in the history of warfare. Its members were recruited from the worlds of art and scholarship. They included museum directors from America and Britain, architects, academic art historians, a sculptor, a cathedral dean. Most of them were significantly older than the soldiers fighting around them. None of them had combat training in any meaningful sense. They were given the rank of officer and sent into the field with a mandate to do what they could. What they could do, it turned out, was remarkable. They moved through the combat zones just behind the front lines, sometimes just behind, sometimes directly in them, identifying buildings and monuments at risk, briefing military commanders on what not to bomb when possible, and following the retreating German forces to find what had been hidden. They worked with almost no resources. They were usually the only MFAA officer assigned to cover enormous stretches of territory. They drove themselves in jeeps on roads that were mined and shelled, went into buildings that had not been cleared, descended into underground repositories that the Germans had rigged as they left. At the salt mine of Altaussee in Austria, they found one of the largest art repositories in history. Thousands of paintings, sculptures, and artifacts stacked in the tunnels of an active salt mine deep in the mountains. Among them were Michelangelo's Madonna of Bruges, Jan van Eyck's Ghent altarpiece, Vermeer's The Astronomer, and hundreds of other works the world had believed lost. The mine had been set with explosives by Hitler's orders, the intention to destroy rather than surrender. The local miners, on their own initiative, had removed the explosive detonators before the MFAA arrived. But the danger had been real, and the men who went into those tunnels did so knowing it. 2 Monuments men died during the course of the war. Ronald Balfour, a British historian, was killed by artillery fire in Germany in March of 1945. Walter Huchthausen, an American architect, was killed in a road accident in France. They died doing what they had been assigned to do in conditions that were hostile and under-resourced for objects that could not protect them. There is something the mind catches on in their story, and it is this: they chose to be there. These were not draftees who had no alternative. They were professionals with expertise that was genuinely valuable to the military, who volunteered for an assignment that placed them in combat zones in their 40s and 50s, with no weapons and insufficient support, because they believed the work mattered. They believed that the Madonna of Bruges was worth the risk, that the Ghent altarpiece was worth the risk, that the thousands of nameless objects, the church carvings, the civic records, the family portraits from looted Jewish homes, were worth the risk. They were right. And not just in the obvious sense that the works were saved. They were right because the argument they were making, with their presence, with their choices, with the thing they were willing to put themselves in danger to protect, was an argument about what civilization is. A civilization is not its armies, or its borders, or its economic output. It is the accumulated expression of what its people made when they were trying to tell the truth about what it felt like to be alive. Destroy that, and the victory means something less. Preserve it, and the victory means something more. Means that the thing you were fighting to defend still exists to be defended. The monument's men saved approximately 5 million works of art. The exact number is not calculable. The records are incomplete. The recoveries were often chaotic. The documentation done in the field under difficult conditions. But the magnitude is undeniable. They saved what Hitler had tried to steal and what the war had tried to destroy. And they did it with cameras and flashlights and expertise, and the particular stubbornness of people who had decided that beauty was worth protecting, even when the world was ugly. We remember the generals. We should also remember the men who followed them into Europe carrying nothing but the knowledge of what was worth saving, and the conviction that saving it was worth everything.